When we think of Italy, we imagine a unified culture, one language, one flag, one people. This vision was forged in the 19th century by revolutionaries like Garibaldi, who stitched together a patchwork of kingdoms and republics into a single nation. But what if this political unity masks a deeper, far older truth? What if the story told by Italy's blood is not one of unification, but of endless, beautiful division? Modern genetics has just performed an autopsy on the very concept of Italianness. The results are clear and shocking. Italian DNA is not a single story. It is the most complex, layered, and regionally divided genetic landscape in all of Europe. From the Alps to Sicily, the genome tells a tale of separate worlds, ancient isolations, and migrations so profound they created not one people, but many. The Italian peninsula was not a cradle for a single race. It was a stage where the entire history of the Mediterranean played out. Italy as a nation is young. The Italian Republic, as we understand it today, is barely a century and a half old. Yet the people who inhabit the peninsula are the product of tens of thousands of years of human movement, settlement, and separation. Long before Rome, before Latin, before Christianity, or even the idea of a unified Italy, the peninsula was already divided into distinct regional populations. These groups were shaped not by politics, but by deep time, by climate shifts, migration waves, and long periods of isolation that allowed genetic differences to accumulate and persist. Geography was the silent architect of this division. The Alps did not simply protect Italy, they filtered who could enter from the north. The Apennines did not unify the peninsula, they fractured it into east and west. Seas connected Italy to the wider Mediterranean while simultaneously isolating its islands, and valleys created pockets of human continuity that lasted for millennia. These natural features acted not as hard borders, but as biological sieves, slowing some migrations, amplifying others, and shaping who mixed with whom. Modern genetics now confirms what geography long implied. DNA carries a memory far deeper than any national myth or political boundary. It records ancient separations, forgotten migrations, and regional continuity that no flag can erase. Empires rise and fall, borders are drawn and redrawn, but the genome preserves the truth beneath them all. Italy may be politically unified, but its people remain a living archive of a far older, far more complex human past, one written not in laws or languages, but in blood. For over a century, the cultural and economic divide between northern and southern Italy has been a source of tension, misunderstanding, and even stereotype. The north is often associated with industry, efficiency, and wealth, while the south is painted with images of tradition, slower pace, and economic struggle. These social perceptions are well known, but what is less obvious is that the divide is not purely cultural or economic. It is written into the very DNA of the Italian people. The genetic differences between the North and the South predate modern Italy by thousands of years, revealing a biological fracture that mirrors and perhaps even shapes centuries of regional distinction.
Genetics shows that this divide is not imaginary, nor is it a reflection of superiority or inferiority. It is simply a record of history, migration, and geography encoded in the genome. Studies using genome-wide analysis have demonstrated that individuals from northern Italy share more genetic similarities with populations in Central and Western Europe, while southern Italians have stronger genetic ties to the eastern Mediterranean, including Greece, Anatolia, and the Levant. These patterns are not subtle hints, they are profound differences that have persisted across millennia, shaping the diversity of the Italian peninsula long before political unification. To put this in perspective, the genetic distance between a person from Milan in Lombardy and a person from Calabria in the far south can be greater than the distance between a Milanese individual and someone from Spain, France, or southern Germany. This striking fact highlights that Italy is not a genetic monolith. Instead, it is a country where ancient migrations, geographical barriers, and historical settlements combined to produce one of the sharpest internal genetic gradients in Europe. The genome tells a story that challenges our assumptions about national identity and regional unity. This deep genetic divide also illuminates why regional identities in Italy are so strong. From dialects to cuisine, from traditions to local festivals, the differences between North and South reflect thousands of years of independent genetic and cultural evolution. Italy's DNA is a map of human movement, adaptation, and survival, and understanding it requires seeing beyond the modern nation-state to the ancient peoples whose lives, choices, and migrations created the living mosaic we now call Italy. Northern Italy occupies a unique position at the heart of Europe's crossroads, wedged between the Alps to the north and the Po Valley below. This strategic location made it a natural corridor for migration, trade, and conquest over thousands of years. Peoples moving from Central and Western Europe, from Celtic tribes and Italic peoples to Roman legions, repeatedly passed through this region, leaving genetic marks that layered upon one another. Geography here was not a barrier, it was a filter, allowing movement while shaping the populations that settled and thrived in the valleys and plains of the north. Over the centuries, the Alps acted both as a shield and a conduit. While the mountains limited direct influence from the Mediterranean to the south, they opened pathways for northern and central European populations. Germanic tribes like the Lombards, who established kingdoms after the fall of Rome, left a significant imprint on northern genomes. Even trade routes and medieval migrations further reinforced these continental connections, bringing new genetic contributions and helping northern Italy evolve in a direction distinct from the Mediterranean south. As a result, northern Italian DNA today clusters closely with Central and Western Europeans, including the French, Swiss, and Southern Germans. This genetic signature reflects a long history of continental integration, migration, and admixture, rather than the Mediterranean-focused influences that shaped the South. The people of the North, therefore, carry in their genes a story of Europe's heartland, a living record of movement through mountains, valleys, and rivers that have defined the identity of this region for millennia.
Southern Italy tells a story that is almost the mirror image of the North. Instead of the Alpine-filtered continental influences, the South has been shaped by its direct and enduring connection to the Mediterranean world. Its genome reflects a powerful pull toward Greece, Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Levant, with genetic markers that trace back thousands of years to ancient farmers, Greek colonists, and Near Eastern traders. This is not a subtle signal or a minor influence. It dominates the genetic identity of the region, giving Southern Italians a DNA signature that is markedly different from their northern neighbors. Geography made southern Italy a hub of movement rather than a barrier. The coastline, harbors, and fertile plains of Campania, Calabria, and Apulia facilitated waves of migration, trade, and settlement from across the Mediterranean. The Greek colonization of Magna Graecia in the 8th century BCE, for instance, was both culturally transformative and genetically significant. Thousands of settlers founded cities, married local populations, and embedded a Hellenic legacy into the DNA of the South. Later interactions with Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, Normans, and others only added to this genetic richness, making southern Italy a true crossroads of civilizations. This connectivity explains why southern Italy was never peripheral to the Mediterranean world, it was central to it. While northern Italy developed strong continental affinities through the Alps, the south remained deeply tied to the eastern Mediterranean, absorbing and preserving genetic contributions from across the sea. The result is a region where history and biology converge, producing a population whose ancestry is a living record of thousands of years of maritime exchange, cultural blending, and strategic settlement along one of the most dynamic regions of the ancient world. Islands have always acted as natural laboratories for human history, preserving genetic patterns that mainland populations often lose or dilute over time.
Sicily and Sardinia, though part of the same political entity today, tell radically different stories of ancestry. Sicily, positioned at the crossroads of the Mediterranean, has been a magnet for migration for thousands of years. Greek colonists, Phoenician traders, Arab rulers, Norman conquerors, and even Spanish administrators all left their mark, blending into the local population. The result is a genome that reads like a layered history book, reflecting centuries of cultural and biological mixing that made Sicily one of the most genetically cosmopolitan regions in Europe. Sardinia, by contrast, is the genetic opposite, a living time capsule. Isolated by mountains and sea, Sardinians avoided most of the later waves of migration that transformed mainland Italy. Their DNA retains extraordinarily high levels of Neolithic farmer ancestry, with minimal influence from steppe pastoralists or other later populations. In this sense, Sardinia functions as a genetic museum, offering a rare glimpse into Europe's early agricultural populations. Together, these islands demonstrate the extremes of Italy's genetic landscape, one shaped by relentless movement and integration, the other by isolation and preservation, both revealing how geography, migration, and time leave enduring traces in the human genome. After the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, much of Europe was a frozen and inhospitable landscape. As the glaciers receded, humans began to repopulate the continent, moving into territories that had been uninhabitable for millennia. In Italy, Mesolithic hunter-gatherers were among the first to resettle the peninsula. These early inhabitants lived in small, mobile groups, relying on hunting, fishing, and foraging for survival. Though their material culture left only faint traces, their genetic footprint remains detectable in modern Italians, particularly in the northern and central regions where later migrations layered upon this foundational population. The Mesolithic hunter-gatherers contributed crucial genetic threads that would persist through millennia of migration and mixing. While their overall proportion in the modern Italian genome is relatively small compared to later populations, it is still significant for understanding the peninsula's deep history. These early Europeans were highly adapted to the post-glacial environment, with genes influencing metabolism, immune response, and other traits that would help their descendants survive in a changing climate. Their presence is like an ancient whisper in the DNA, subtle but undeniable, linking modern Italians to a distant Ice Age world. Understanding these first layers also provides context for later demographic events. When Neolithic farmers arrived from Anatolia, followed by steppe pastoralists, they did not entirely replace the hunter-gatherers, they mixed with them. This created a layered genetic landscape where ancient Mesolithic ancestry persisted alongside newer contributions. In this way, modern Italian DNA is a palimpsest, with the faint but persistent signature of Ice Age survivors forming the foundational layer upon which thousands of years of migration, conquest, and cultural change were written.
Around 8,000 years ago, a transformative wave swept into Europe from Anatolia, the region that is now modern-day Turkey. These early farmers were not just carriers of new crops or farming techniques. They were a people moving en masse, bringing their communities, their livestock, and their genetic legacy. Unlike previous cultural exchanges, which might spread ideas without significant movement of people, this migration involved actual demographic replacement. The hunter-gatherer populations of southern Europe were gradually absorbed, intermarried with, or displaced by these newcomers, leaving a profound and lasting mark on the genome of the peninsula. The Neolithic Revolution fundamentally changed southern Italy and its surrounding islands. Fertile plains, mild climates, and accessible coastlines made the region a natural destination for these settlers. They established permanent villages, developed early agricultural practices, and introduced pottery, new tools, and domesticated animals. The genetic impact of these Anatolian farmers was particularly strong in the south and on islands like Sardinia and Sicily. Today, southern Italians carry a high proportion of this ancestry, linking them directly to the first agricultural pioneers who crossed the Mediterranean millennia ago. This migration did more than shape genetics, it reshaped culture, diet, and lifestyle.
Farming created the conditions for population growth, settlement, and eventual social complexity. It also established a biological and cultural foundation that would persist even as later waves of steppe pastoralists, Greeks, Romans, and others arrived. In essence, the Neolithic farmers from Anatolia anchored southern Italy to the ancient Near East, leaving a living testament in DNA that continues to distinguish the South from the North and preserve a connection to one of Europe's earliest civilizations. Around 4,000 years ago, a new and transformative wave of migration swept into Europe from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. These steppe pastoralists were horse-riding herders who brought with them not only livestock and new technologies, but also complex social structures and the seeds of the Indo-European language family. Unlike the gradual cultural diffusion of earlier periods, this movement was rapid and expansive, leaving a profound imprint on the populations they encountered. Their arrival reshaped Europe's demographic landscape, introducing new genetic components that would eventually dominate much of the region's northern regions. In Italy, the impact of the steppe wave was geographically uneven. Northern Italy, with its alpine passes and plains, absorbed the steppe migrants more extensively, resulting in a genetic signature that strongly reflects this northern influence. In the south, the steppe contribution was weaker, as the region remained more tied to its earlier Neolithic farmer ancestry from Anatolia and later Mediterranean influences. Sardinia, largely isolated by sea and mountains, was minimally affected, preserving its unique Neolithic genetic heritage. This migration created the foundational fault line that would define the deep genetic distinction between northern and southern Italy, a divide that echoes across millennia and remains detectable in the DNA of modern populations. Long before the rise of Rome, the Italian peninsula was a mosaic of distinct peoples, each with their own languages, cultures, and genetic identities. In the north, Celtic tribes had settled the Po Valley, bringing Central European ancestry and traditions that would leave enduring marks on the local genome. The central regions were dominated by the Etruscans and various Italic tribes, whose complex societies blended indigenous hunter-gatherer heritage with Neolithic and steppe ancestries. Meanwhile, the south and the islands had already been touched by Greek colonization and Mediterranean migrations, creating populations with strong Eastern Mediterranean genetic signatures. This patchwork of peoples meant that Italy as a single cultural or genetic entity did not exist. Each region evolved along its own trajectory, influenced by geography, trade, and migration. Mountains, rivers, and seas acted as natural boundaries, allowing communities to develop in relative isolation while still absorbing new influences at strategic points of contact. By the time Rome began its expansion, it was stepping into a land that was already diverse, with genetic and cultural landscapes that reflected millennia of movement, settlement, and interaction. Rome would unify these regions politically, but the deep, pre-existing genetic mosaic would endure beneath the surface. Beginning in the 8th century BCE, southern Italy became a focal point for Greek colonization, an era historians call Magna Graecia, or Great Greece. Entire cities were founded along the coasts, from Naples to Sicily, bringing with them Hellenic architecture, philosophy, and political institutions. But the Greeks did more than transform culture. They transformed people. The settlers intermarried with local populations, establishing permanent communities whose descendants carried both cultural and genetic legacies of the Aegean world. Over centuries, these interwoven populations left a durable imprint on southern Italy, one that would persist through the rise and fall of subsequent empires. This sustained Greek presence made southern Italy distinct not only culturally, but biologically. Genetic studies reveal that modern southern Italians retain significant markers linking them to ancient Greeks and Anatolian populations, reflecting the deep Mediterranean connectivity of the region. In essence, southern Italy became biologically Aegean, a bridge between Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. The Greek colonization reinforced and amplified the region's pre-existing Neolithic and Anatolian ancestry, creating a unique blend that distinguishes the South from the North, and which can still be read in the DNA of millions of people today. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, ruling millions of people through law, infrastructure, and administration rather than through large-scale resettlement. Rome's power was rooted in culture, governance, and ideology, not in genetic homogenization. Soldiers, merchants, and slaves did move across the empire, and some intermarried locally, but these migrations were selective and relatively limited compared to the scale of the population. As a result, the genetic landscape of the Italian peninsula remained remarkably diverse, preserving the distinctions between North, South, and the islands despite centuries of political unity. While Rome created an unprecedented cultural cohesion, Latin language, legal systems, architectural styles, and shared civic identity, it did not erase the ancestral threads woven over millennia. Regional populations maintained their genetic signatures, which were layered with influences from previous migrations, invasions, and settlements. In essence, Rome succeeded in unifying culture, but left ancestry largely intact. Italians today still carry the echoes of this ancient diversity, a living reminder that the empire's reach was cultural and political first, biological second. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE, northern Italy became a prime target for waves of Germanic migrations. Tribes such as the Lombards, Ostrogoths, and later the Franks established kingdoms, settled across the plains, and integrated with local populations. Their arrival was not just political, it left a lasting imprint on the genetic landscape. Modern northern Italians still carry these ancestral markers, reflecting centuries of northern European influence that layered onto the earlier Roman and pre-Roman populations. These migrations reinforced the North's continental genetic affinities, creating a distinct contrast with the South. Meanwhile, southern Italy followed a very different path. Over the centuries, it was shaped by Byzantine rule, Arab settlement, Norman conquest, and Swabian administration. Each wave introduced new genetic threads, blending European, North African, and Near Eastern ancestry into the local gene pool. Sicily, in particular, became a true melting pot, absorbing influences from Greece, North Africa, the Levant, and Western Europe. This constant layering created a complex cosmopolitan genetic profile in the South, preserving its role as a central node in Mediterranean history. The contrast between North and South, shaped by these post-Roman movements, remains one of the clearest examples of how history and geography sculpted Italy's genetic mosaic. Sicily's unique geography at the center of the Mediterranean made it a natural crossroads for peoples, cultures, and empires from Europe, Africa, and Asia. Over centuries, the island was shaped by waves of migration and conquest, from Greek colonists establishing the cities of Magna Graecia, to Arab rulers introducing North African and Middle Eastern influences, to Norman conquerors connecting it back to Western Europe. Jewish communities, Phoenicians, and later Spanish settlers also left their mark, creating a rich tapestry of ancestry that few other regions on Earth can rival. Its result is a genome that reads like a historical archive. Sicilians today carry genetic signatures from multiple continents, reflecting centuries of coexistence and integration. Their DNA reveals the island's past as a hub of trade, conquest, and cultural blending, where people from diverse origins intermarried and established lasting communities. This tri-continental mixture makes Sicily one of Europe's most genetically cosmopolitan regions, a living testament to the human movements that have shaped the Mediterranean for millennia. Sardinia stands apart from the rest of Italy in a way that is both striking and rare. Geographically isolated by mountains and sea, the island avoided much of the mass migration and invasions that reshaped the mainland. As a result, Sardinians remain one of Europe's most genetically distinct populations. Their DNA carries extraordinarily high levels of Neolithic farmer ancestry, reflecting the early agricultural settlers who first arrived in the region around 8,000 years ago.
In contrast, they show minimal genetic influence from steppe pastoralists and later European migrations, preserving a genomic snapshot that is remarkably close to the continent's earliest farming populations. This isolation has created a population whose genome is almost like a living museum. Sardinians today carry markers and sequences that are far closer to early European farmers than most modern Italians, providing researchers with invaluable insight into prehistoric human movements. Their genetic uniqueness highlights the role of geography in shaping ancestry, showing how isolation can preserve ancient lineages while the surrounding regions continue to experience waves of migration and mixing. In this sense, Sardinia is not just an island, it is a time capsule, holding a record of Europe's distant past written in the DNA of its people. Isolation is one of the most powerful forces in shaping human genetics, and Sardinia is a perfect example of its effects. The island's mountainous terrain and surrounding seas limited migration and interaction with outside populations for thousands of years. Unlike the Italian mainland, which experienced waves of conquest, trade, and settlement from multiple directions, Sardinia's population remained relatively stable. This geographic and cultural isolation allowed ancient genetic lineages, particularly those of the early Neolithic farmers, to persist nearly untouched, preserving a level of ancestral variation that is rare in modern Europe.
Because of this isolation, Sardinians avoided the genetic homogenization that transformed much of the mainland. While the rest of Italy saw the influx of steppe pastoralists, Greek colonists, Arabs, Normans, and other migrating groups, Sardinia remained a genetic stronghold of Europe's earliest farming populations. This makes the island a unique living laboratory for studying human evolution and population history. By analyzing Sardinian DNA, researchers can glimpse what European genomes looked like before centuries of migration and admixture reshaped the continent, demonstrating just how much geography and isolation can protect the legacy of the past. Modern commercial DNA tests often surprise Italians, revealing ancestry patterns that challenge long-held assumptions about identity. In the South, individuals may see significant percentages of Greek, Anatolian, Levantine, or even North African ancestry, alongside what is broadly labeled Italian. For many, these results are startling because they reveal connections that stretch far beyond the peninsula, into regions that contributed people, culture, and genes thousands of years ago. In the North, DNA tests frequently highlight French, German, or Alpine ancestry, reflecting centuries of continental migration, trade, and conquest. These results illustrate that regional Italian identities are underpinned by deep and complex genetic histories. This is not a case of misclassification or error. It is history encoded in DNA. Each signal tells a story of migration, isolation, conquest, and mixing, tracing back millennia. Modern Italians carry the legacy of hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, steppe pastoralists, Greek colonists, Arabs, Normans, and other later migrants from Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. DNA tests simply reveal what historical records, archaeology, and anthropology have long suggested, that Italian ancestry is far from homogeneous, and that the genetic reality is richer, more complex, and more interconnected than any single political or cultural definition can capture. The term Italian is, in many ways, a political and cultural convenience rather than a reflection of a single unified genetic heritage. The modern nation of Italy was created in the 19th century, stitching together kingdoms, duchies, and city-states that had existed independently for centuries. These regions were home to populations with distinct ancestries shaped by geography, migration, conquest, and isolation. From the Alps in the north to the shores of Sicily in the south, people carried genetic legacies that were centuries, even millennia old, long before the word Italy existed on a map. Genetically, being Italian does not imply homogeneity or purity. Instead, it reflects the blending of countless ancestral threads across time. Northern Italians carry DNA influenced by Central and Western European populations, while Southern Italians show strong ties to the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East.
Sardinians, meanwhile, preserve a lineage dating back to Europe's earliest farmers. The political and cultural identity of Italy overlays these diverse genetic landscapes, creating a sense of unity that exists in law and language, but not in the genome. In reality, to be genetically Italian is to be a living mosaic, a layered tapestry of multiple peoples and histories. Italy's true genius has never been rooted in uniformity or purity. It has always been in its remarkable ability to absorb, integrate, and transform. Throughout history, the peninsula has been a crossroads where people, ideas, and innovations met and intertwined. From the early Greek colonists in the south to the Germanic tribes in the north, from Arab traders in Sicily to Renaissance scholars in Florence, each wave of influence added depth to the cultural and genetic mosaic. Innovation, creativity, and resilience arose not from isolation, but from contact and exchange, proving that diversity itself can be a source of power. Modern genetics confirms what historians have long suspected. Italy's strength was built on mixture. The genome tells the story of a people forged not by a single origin, but by countless convergences of ancestry across space and time. Northern, southern, and island populations each carry distinct threads of this shared history, yet together they form a vibrant and dynamic tapestry. Italy's past, present, and future are defined by this richness of origin, a living testament to the idea that diversity is not merely a fact of life, but a driver of civilization itself. Italy is not a single uniform people. It is a collection of many peoples, each with its own history, migrations, and genetic legacy, brought together under a shared political and cultural identity. Over millennia, mountains, rivers, and seas created pockets of isolation and hubs of connection, allowing distinct populations to flourish independently while still interacting at key crossroads. The Italian identity, as we understand it today, is less about homogeneity and more about coexistence, a patchwork of histories and ancestries that learn to share a name, a language, and a national narrative. Every region of Italy reads like a chapter in this living story, from the Celtic-tinged north to the Hellenized south, from the cosmopolitan Sicilian coastlines to the time capsule isolation of Sardinia. Each genome carries a detailed archive of human movement, settlement, and adaptation. DNA is the library of the Italian mosaic, preserving ancient migrations, cultural exchanges, and regional uniqueness. Together, these genetic threads form a tapestry that is as diverse as it is interconnected, reminding us that identity is not singular, but layered, and that the story of Italy is ultimately a story of human diversity in all its complexity. Identity is not a single fixed concept. It is layered, dynamic, and constantly reshaped by the movements of people over time. Each genome carries the echoes of countless journeys, migrations, invasions, trade, and settlement that have left enduring traces across generations. Italian DNA, in particular, illustrates this complexity vividly. It reveals a tapestry woven from diverse ancestries, from Mesolithic hunter-gatherers to Neolithic farmers, steppe pastoralists, Greek colonists, Roman settlers, and later waves of migrants from Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. DNA tests simply reveal what historical records, archaeology, and anthropology have long suggested, that Italian ancestry is far from homogeneous, and that the genetic reality is richer, more complex, and more interconnected than any single political or cultural definition can capture. If this journey through the genetic soul of Italy changed how you see ancestry, subscribe to the Footcast. We uncover the deep biological truths hiding beneath simple stories. Which nation's genetic myth should we unravel next? Spain? Turkey? Japan? Ethiopia? Share this video because the truth about who we are is always more complex and more beautiful than the myth.